Hello YouTube, I'm Pilot Stud and today I'm going through my settings for Microsoft Flight Simulator, which I've tweaked and I think I found the best performance to FPS ratio. Let's hop into this video. Hello YouTube, I'm Pilot Stud and as I said, welcome back. If you're new here, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. I do flight sim videos, flight training videos, trip reports and a lot more. So if you love everything about aviation, you've certainly come to the right place. Now today we're here at London Stansted Airport, which is kind of the benchmark airport for FPS and graphics testing for me. I've done a video on my settings before, right after Microsoft Flight Simulator came out. So now we're about 3 months since it was released. I'm going to hop into my settings and show you guys what I use. Now I'm of course not saying these are the greatest settings for Microsoft Flight Simulator. There's probably ways you could improve it. I'm not going to deny that. However, for me, I think this offers the best look on the sim and good performance overall. Never really drops below 30 FPS in all aircraft, except when loading in new scenery of course, but even then it's still playable at around 25 FPS. Today's video I will be showing you my FPS in different aircraft, but before we do that let's hop into my settings. Okay, so here we are in my settings, and as you can see I'm not using any presets because they're not very good if I'm being completely honest. Now before we talk about the settings, I think I need to talk about my PC specs. Graphics card wise I'm using an RX 5600 XT, a very good medium range graphics card that was around £230. Falls quite a bit above the mid spec of Microsoft Flight Simulator's recommended settings, however it is not the best graphics card on the market. It's pretty good but it's certainly not the best. CPU wise, I've got a Ryzen 5 3600, which is a very capable entry level CPU, around £150 I believe. Now RAM wise, and I do think RAM is the most important for no stutters, I've got 32GB of DDR4 RAM at 3200 MHz. I highly recommend you upgrade your RAM if you're encountering loads of stutters, because it seems to have solved most of it for me. So there's my settings. It's kind of a mid-high PC. All in all cost me around £600, £650 to build. I'll put a link up the top now for my PC build video. Okay, so starting off with VSync, I turn that on and I limit my frame rate to 60 FPS, and it does get up there quite often. You'll see that in a minute. Render scaling, I highly recommend you don't turn this down because as soon as you start to, it will look worse. I always keep it at 100. Anti-aliasing, why I use TAA, it's the best one. Although recently it has been looking a bit grainy than it used to, but it is the best one and it really doesn't affect your performance much. If you turn it down you might get a 1 or 2 FPS boost, but it's really not worth it. Now my terrain level of detail is set to 100, but I can easily take it down to 90 or 80 with very little difference in what the ground looks like, and I might get 4 or 5 FPS out of that. I don't normally do it because I like to have it look as good as it can look on my PC. I don't really need to lower it, but if you do struggle with FPS I recommend you lower this one. Terrain vector data, I set that to ultra. It just makes everything look nice. You just have better oceans, lakes, rivers and roads, as you can see up there. Buildings wise, now you can set this down to medium. I keep it at high just because I think it makes the airports look a bit better. As I said, doesn't really make a massive difference. However, if you like your trees, I recommend you put this on high. Trees on low settings or even medium don't look great, I have to admit, and they really do start to affect the overall look of Microsoft Flight Simulator. So you can see up here I have sacrificed some performance for looks, however I do think these are worth it. And grass and bushes, I don't personally really care about them, and they are quite heavy on FPS. I'm not a big grass fan, I think it looks good in places but not everywhere, so I set it to medium. Objects level of detail, like terrain level of detail, you can set that down to 90 or even 80, but I prefer to keep it up here. Volumetric clouds, I love my clouds, so I put this on high, and same with texture resolution, just everything looks better. Now I guess I'm kind of pushing my graphics card to the limit up here. Anti-strophic filtering is set to 8 times, and textless super sampling is set to 4x4. I'm not too sure what many of these do, but the performance hit hasn't been too drastic, so I really don't mind. Set both of these to medium. Water waves I can set to lower if I'm not flying over much water. I do like my water waves looking good, so I do have them on medium. I wouldn't put them up to high because they do get incredibly bad. Shadow maps, I believe I've turned down from the default high value just because, just like in X-Plane 11, shadows don't matter too much to me, and that's why contact shadows is on medium. Windshield effects, I'm on high. If you fly in the rain, you'll know why it's on high. It looks absolutely amazing. Light shafts and reflections are on medium. I just think it looks better. I'm not really bothered here, so I like to keep this as low as I can, and it still looks pretty good with them. Bloom I've got on, depth of field I've got low, as well as motion blur. I don't really like these, and they do affect my FPS quite a bit. I'm not a big fan of any of these, definitely not depth of field. I think it does look good in places, but at times it can make it look a bit too cinematic, which is why it's low. And most importantly, glass cockpit refresh rate. We'll hop in the cockpit in a minute. This really does affect your FPS. They still haven't 100% sorted it out, so keep it on low for the time being, guys. I highly recommend that in the 787, 747 and A320. Doesn't make too much of a difference to the actual look of the sim. Can look a bit jerky in places on the screen with the low refresh rate, but personally I do think it's certainly worth it. Okay, so we've swapped liveries just to make it look nicer, and you can see outside we're almost getting 60 FPS. Bear in mind we're at London Stansted Airport, so if you go to a smaller airport, I easily hit 60 FPS. Now I do find the livery actually makes quite a bit of difference on this. The British Airways livery I started out with, I believe, had quite a big hit on my FPS, so that's not great. However, 50-60 FPS outside with a few loading in stutters is pretty good, I have to say. Hopping into the cockpit, you can see it does drop down, however it only drops down to around 45-40. As we begin to take off, you can see it does drop down to 30 at times as it's loading in more of the world. However, it's still certainly flyable. 40 FPS is fantastic. 30 FPS is my minimum, as I said. As we're flying away from Stansted, you can see it doesn't reach 50 FPS like it does on the ground. But as we get higher, you'll see that number increase. Just because it's got to load everything in is why it's lower. Hopping back into the cockpit, you can see it becomes a lot more stable. So 30 to 60 FPS in the A320 NX mod, I should say, not that I think it makes a massive difference, is pretty good. A reminder that we're at London Stansted Airport, that is very important. My settings work fantastically with the A320. The only time where there is a few issues is when you're approaching London Heathrow Airport or any big handcrafted airport, but as soon as it loads in, it seems to sort it out itself. Swapping over to the 787, this is probably my most taxing aircraft, which is why I'm including it in this video today. You can see outside at this height we're getting 60-50 FPS. Perfectly playable. 30 FPS is my minimum, so anything above it is great. Hopping into the cockpit, you can see it initially takes quite a bit of a hit, and you can see I believe it's a 787 that has issues with refresh rate. However, once it gets all loaded in, you can see it starts to level off at even 40 FPS. I'm testing it in a quite congested area with quite a few clouds and live weather on, so I think it's doing a pretty solid job. As soon as we hop into smaller aircraft such as the Cessna 152, 60 FPS is consistent. Regardless of where you are in the world, you're just guaranteed a high FPS in this aircraft. Same with the outside, 60 FPS is the norm. It does drop down a few times to load stuff in, but I have to say it works perfectly. So there we have it, guys. There's my settings that you can use as a great template for Microsoft Flight Simulator to improve your performance. Thanks to Bjorn Collins for giving me some tips with the settings. A great supporter of mine, so thank you, buddy, if you're watching. Thanks to all my captains as always. If you'd like to find out how to become a captain, go onto my Discord, the link is in the description. I hope this performance guide video has really helped you out. 60 to 30 FPS anywhere in the world, regardless of the aircraft, is amazing on these settings, and I mean, just look at it. Volumetric clouds on high is a must. I mean, they do look absolutely amazing. If you'd like to see more performance guide videos, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys, but from me today, that is all. Bye bye.